Ted Cruz answered a question from a fellow Republican at the CNN debate the other night, and his answer, to sum it up succinctly, was a lie. So let's watch, and then we'll talk about it.
Senator Cruz, I know that Senator Corker from Tennessee today voted yes in the committee, but there's a question about whether he'll do that when it actually comes up for the vote. I'm really concerned about this deficit situation that we're going into. Today, unemployment is approaching a 20-year low. The stock market reaches an all-time high every day. Corporations are making as much or more money than they've ever made in the history of the United States. A tax cut is a phenomenal weapon that a government can use when they need it. Do we really need a tax cut like this right now in this booming economy that we've got?
So, Stephen, thank you for that question. You know, the interesting thing is the perspective of a booming economy. It is a booming economy for the very wealthy. The rich have done great under Obama. The top 1%, who the Democrats vilify all the time, earn a higher share of our income than any year since 1928. The very rich have done great. You know who's getting hammered? It's working men and women. Why? Because from 2008 to today, the economy's grown only 1.2% a year. It's stagnant. Working men and women. If folks are at home wondering why did Donald Trump win in 2016, the simplest and most direct answer is because working men and women had been left behind by the economy. Now, I agree with you about the debt. It was a big part of why I ran for the Senate. The only force powerful enough to pay down the debt is economic growth. If we get growth back to 3, 4, 5% historic levels, that turns everything around. That's how you pay down the debt. We saw that with Calvin Coolidge in the 1920s. We saw it with John F. Kennedy in the 1960s. We saw it with Ronald Reagan in the 1980s. I want to pay down the debt, which means we need to bring back jobs and get growth, and cutting taxes is the proven method to bringing back jobs and getting the growth to pay the debt back.
So yet again, I mean, this is Ted Cruz lying. Now, if you guys watch the show on a regular basis, I'm actually very hesitant to call people liars. Way more often than not, I'll accuse somebody of being ignorant. So in other words, you don't know the facts, but you're an honest actor who's trying to answer a question, but you're just unaware of what the actual answer is. Or, let's face it, I call people stupid pretty often. So... but in the case of Ted Cruz, I'm comfortable calling him a liar because I know he's smart enough to know the real answers to these questions. There's no doubt he's smart enough to know the answers to these questions. But he's not being honest about it. He's not being straightforward about it. He's being massively misleading. And the reason I'm sure of it is because this is not a hard one to figure out. This is not at all a difficult one to figure out. So, in other words, what Ted Cruz is saying... he's arguing, listen, by cutting taxes, that's going to lead to giant economic growth. And as a result of that, even though people are paying a lower tax rate, there's more revenue going into the government. And therefore, you're going to eliminate the deficit because we're cutting taxes. Now, that's a position that is a math-denying position. Because think about it. When you cut taxes, if you're the government and you cut taxes, what are you doing? You are, by definition, reducing the amount of money the government gets, which means what? You are increasing the deficit. That's not a hard question. It's a matter of math. Okay, the government was taking 25% in taxes from person X. We just cut their rate to 20%. Now we're taking 20%. Does the government have more money or less money now? They have less money. They took 20%, not 25%. But again, the argument is, but when you unleash the beast of the private sector and capitalism, when you cut taxes, and so, that's why you're going to actually decrease the debt and the deficit because there's so much growth that happens when you cut taxes. Now, he goes on to give specific examples, and the examples he's giving doesn't prove his point. It proves his point wrong. It proves the opposite of his point. He's like, Reagan, you look at what happened under Reagan, which unleashed the beast of economic growth. Yeah, right. What happened with Reagan? The debt and the deficit went up. It went up. It hit record heights. And then he literally cites the 1920s and Calvin Coolidge. There's a reason why you don't hear any other politicians ever cite Calvin Coolidge. He was a fucking disaster. The 1920s were called the Roaring Twenties. Why? Because it was the thing that directly preceded the stock market crash in 1929 and the Great Depression. The economic policies of the 19-teens and the 1920s directly led to the Great Depression. And Ted Cruz is saying, I want to copy those policies again. So you want another Great Depression? Thank you for just laying it out there. The fuck is wrong with you, Ted? But that's the thing. I know he's smart enough to know these answers because it's not that difficult. It's not that difficult. You know, he acts like this is Republican 101 is having zero short-term memory because they act like, well, what? Oh, we got to try these ideas. Oh, cutting taxes. Yes, cutting taxes and deregulating. Let's try that. Have you heard of the George W. Bush years? And to be fair, have you heard of Clinton? Clinton signed the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act, which got rid of Glass-Steagall, which made it so commercial banks can do casino capitalist bets with your money. So Clinton deregulated. George W. Bush put the deregulation in overdrive. What happened? We had the stock market crash, and we had the Great Recession, subprime mortgage crisis, Great Recession. Ted, if your idea is you're like, oh, well, we got to do this because obviously it'll work. We have evidence from all of our lifetimes. We know it doesn't work. It just fucking happened and led to a giant crash. So this is my point. This is why I say he's a liar. Because Ted Cruz knows that by cutting taxes, by the way, for the rich, because he wants to raise taxes on 75% of the American people, or excuse me, he wants to raise taxes on people who make $75,000 a year or less. Okay, that's what this GOP tax plan does. It's not me speaking, that's the Congressional Budget Office speaking. Ted makes this whole thing there about, oh, it's a boom for the wealthy. You know, the wealthy are doing well. True, Ted. He's like, so that's why, we got to cut taxes. But your plan raises it on people who make $75,000 a year or less. So he's acting like he's cutting your taxes. He's not. He's talking about cutting the richest taxes. And again, history is clear on this. When you cut taxes for the rich and you deregulate, the deficit skyrockets. Record debt and deficit under George W. Bush. Record debt and deficit under Ronald Reagan. And he's using Ronald Reagan as an example of like, this is exactly what I want. Okay, so you want to increase the debt and the deficit. And you want to crash the economy again. That's what's going to fucking happen. So, again, it's just that he knows that this isn't true. He has to know it. So then that means what's his motivation? What's your motivation? His real motivation is doing the bidding of his donors. He has big money donors. He has billionaire donors. He has corporate donors. So how do you serve them? Well, cut their taxes as you pretend that you're cutting middle-class taxes. You're not. It's a fact that the plan does not do that. Cut the richest taxes as you pretend like you're cutting middle-class taxes and lie and say, this is going to help the deficit, even though you know it won't. You know, as a matter of fact. Trickle-down economics, which is what he's advocating for here, used to be called voodoo economics. And it was called voodoo economics by even George H.W. Bush because he said, this is voodoo, it doesn't work. Really? You're going to cut taxes for the rich and increase government revenue? That's nonsense. So he's lying. That's what he's lying. He's lying to the face. And this is a Republican voter. A Republican voter who says, look, man, I care about the deficit. But why would you fucking cut taxes when, the rich are doing just fine? The stock market's at a record high. The debt is the thing that he's concerned about. He says the debt's not doing too well, and you are going to increase it. And Ted has to lie and say, no, I'm not. No, I'm not. Because when you do the magic spell of the free market and you unleash the beast, somehow by cutting the amount of money coming into the government, you're increasing the amount of money coming into the government. He is a corporate puppet. That's what he is. He's doing the bidding of the rich and the corporations, and that's his whole ideology. Everything else is rationalizations. That's it. That's all that is. So he will lie, he will deflect, he will obfuscate solely to serve his donors, because this isn't a genuine philosophical disagreement, because the evidence is in. The data is in, and he's 100% wrong. It's not an open question.